Hey guys, tonight we're whisking you away to ancient Greece. Picture this. The sun, a molten orange eye, is just beginning to peek over the wine-dark Aegean Sea. You can smell the salt and fish from the harbor, hear the bleating of goats being herded to pasture. The air is still cool, carrying whispers of olive groves and the faint scent of wood smoke. Your stomach rumbles, but breakfast will be a simple affair. Maybe some barley porridge and a handful of olives. It's a beautiful morning, but let's be honest, you probably won't survive this without a serious dose of modern medicine and indoor plumbing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it? I'm curious to know who's braving this historical adventure with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge out of your small, one-room dwelling, its mud brick walls surprisingly effective at keeping out the evening chill. It's not exactly a palace, but hey, at least you have a roof over your head, something that, let's face it, wasn't always guaranteed back then. The village is already stirring. You see your neighbor, a withered farmer, harnessing his ox to a simple wooden plow. He nods a greeting, his face etched with the lines of hard labor. You're off to the fields yourself, hoe in hand, to tend to your small plot of land. You're growing barley and olives, staples that will keep you fed, hopefully. Life in ancient Greece was, for most people, a relentless cycle of agricultural labor. Historians still argue about the exact dietary intake of the average Greek, but it's generally agreed that they weren't exactly indulging in lavish feasts every night. In fact, your diet would be primarily vegetarian, supplemented with occasional bits of cheese or fish if you were lucky. Meat was a rare treat, reserved for special occasions or religious sacrifices. And speaking of sacrifice, you really hope the gods are on your side this year. A bad harvest could mean starvation. As you hoe your field, the sun climbs higher, beating down on your back. You pause to wipe the sweat from your brow, the coarse linen of your tunic sticking to your skin. You notice a group of children playing near the village well, their laughter a fleeting moment of joy in an otherwise demanding existence. One of them kicks a leather ball, but you know that tomorrow, they'll likely be helping their parents with chores. Childhood was short-lived in ancient Greece, and everyone was expected to contribute to the family's survival. You work tirelessly until midday, when you break for a simple lunch of bread and water. The water, drawn from the well, tastes slightly earthy, but it's better than nothing. As you eat, you overhear a conversation between two other farmers about the upcoming Panathenaic Games in Athens. They speak of athletic prowess and the glory of victory, but you can't help but feel a twinge of envy. Such events were reserved for those with the time and resources to participate, a luxury you simply can't afford. Besides, you're pretty sure you trip over your own feet in the stadium. Did you know that the original Olympic Games only featured one event, a foot race? And that athletes competed completely naked? Talk about an icebreaker. Back to work. The afternoon stretches on, the sun relentless. You pull weeds, water your crops, and try to protect them from pests. You long for the cool evening breeze, but it seems an eternity away. The Greeks were incredibly resourceful, inventing irrigation systems and developing crop rotation techniques to maximize their yields. It was all about making the most of what they had. But even with all their ingenuity, life was precarious. Famine, disease, and war were constant threats. Let's face it, you're basically just trying to make it to tomorrow. As evening approaches, you return to your village, exhausted but satisfied with a day's work. You deliver some olives to market for sale, and some grapes to your neighbor in return for the barley he gave you earlier this month. The village square is bustling with activity as people prepare their evening meals. The air fills with the aroma of cooking food and the sound of chatter. You see a group of men gathered near the local tavern, discussing politics and sharing stories. Historians still debate the level of political participation among the common people in ancient Greece. While democracy flourished in Athens, it was far from a universal experience. Many Greeks lived under the rule of oligarchs or tyrants, and even in democratic cities, citizenship was often restricted to a small percentage of the population. You join your family for a simple evening meal of lentil stew and bread. Your children recount their day's adventures, their faces animated with youthful energy. After dinner, you gather around the hearth to tell stories and sing songs. You might share tales of gods and heroes, or perhaps relate local gossip. You try not to mention the rumors of war brewing to the north, but it's hard to forget when the sound of troops marching by keep you awake all night. The stories, like food and friendship, are the bedrock on which you're building your family, your life. And it's not the worst life, despite the toil and tribulation. Greeks believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses who intervened in human affairs. They offered sacrifices and prayers in the hopes of gaining divine favor. Ever notice that the planet names are all gods? Later, as you lie down to sleep, the sound of crickets chirping fills the air. You close your eyes and drift off, dreaming of bountiful harvests and a peaceful future. But even in your dreams, the harsh realities of ancient Greek life linger, a reminder of the challenges you will face when the sun rises again. You can only hope that you and your loved ones will still be there to face them. Before we finish this little excursion into the dawn of ancient Greece, I can't help but wonder, what's your favorite ancient Greek myth? Mine's probably Icarus, though he was a bit of an idiot. The Aegean sun, even this early, is already thinking about turning up the heat. You peel open one eye, bleary and slightly salty from the sea air. Seagulls are definitely having a convention outside your window. Great. Sleep? What sleep? Just a fleeting memory now, like that time you tried to make souffle. Disaster. You groan, roll over, and contemplate the sheer audacity of morning. But duty calls, or rather, your rumbling stomach does. Today, you're diving headfirst into the breakfast habits of ancient Greece, a culinary journey that promises to be, well, interesting and revealing. Because, spoiler alert, not everyone was feasting on ambrosia and nectar every day. More like barley porridge and whatever they could scrounge up. Ambrosia was reserved for the gods, obviously. Regular folk? Not so much. You sigh, swing your legs over the side of the bed, a surprisingly comfortable cot, all things considered, and prepare to face the day and the inevitable carbs. You trudge towards what appears to be the communal dining area. It's a large, open-air courtyard, bathed in that glorious Greek light that makes everything look a little more epic. Even the pigeons. A long wooden table dominates the space, already partially occupied by your fellow time travelers. You spot a few familiar faces from yesterday's symposium. They look just as thrilled as you do to be awake. The aroma wafting from the far end of the table is intriguing. A mixture of warm grains, herbs, and something vaguely goaty. You approach cautiously, your stomach grumbling a little louder now, betraying your initial hesitation. Before you sits a selection of breakfast options, neatly arranged, or as neatly as things get in ancient Greece, which is to say, not very. There's a large bowl of maza, a barley porridge that seems to be the staple. It's thick, hearty, and surprisingly bland. Alongside it are a few chunks of feta cheese, some olives, of course, it's Greece, and a small dish of honey. You also spot some dried figs and a scattering of almonds. So, not exactly a full English, but hey, at least there's no black pudding. You shudder involuntarily at the thought. You grab a bowl of maza, add a generous dollop of honey, because you're fancy like that, and plop yourself down at the table. You spear an olive with a toothpick, pop it in your mouth, and survey your breakfast companions. Some are tucking into their porridge with gusto, while others are nibbling at the dried figs with a more discerning air. A few are even daring enough to add a pinch of salt to their maza. Adventurous souls, those ones. You take a bite of your own concoction. The maza itself is fairly tasteless, but the honey definitely helps. It's a simple, honest meal, the kind that fuels farmers and philosophers alike. And speaking of philosophers, you recall that Plato was a big fan of simple meals, believing that they foster a clear and focused mind. Though, you suspect he probably had a cook to prepare said simple meals. You, on the other hand, are stuck with DIY maza. As you eat, you start to notice the subtle differences in the food being consumed around you. The man sitting across from you, dressed in finer linen than most, has a small plate of what appears to be cakes made with olive oil and honey. He's also sipping from a delicate ceramic cup. Meanwhile, further down the table, a woman in rough-spun clothes is sharing a piece of dried bread with her children. Their breakfast looks decidedly less appetizing. And that's when it hits you. This isn't just breakfast, it's a microcosm of Greek society. A culinary reflection of the rigid social hierarchy that defined ancient life. The wealthy elite enjoyed delicacies, like honey cakes and imported fruits, while the poorer classes subsisted on basic staples like barley and olives. The difference, you realize, is stark, almost brutal. You think about that rich guy's honey cakes, and maybe your stomach growls a little louder. The ancient Greek economy was largely agrarian, meaning that wealth was tied to land ownership. The aristocracy, who controlled vast tracts of land, had access to a wider variety of foods and resources. The lower classes, who worked the land as farmers or laborers, had to make do with what they could grow or earn. Historians still argue whether the gap between the rich and the poor was as wide as some accounts suggest. Some argue that even the lower classes had access to a relatively nutritious diet, thanks to the abundance of olive oil, grains, and vegetables. Others maintain that poverty was widespread and that many Greeks struggled to survive on a daily basis. Regardless, it's clear that access to food was a significant marker of social status. Even in death, it was evident. Elaborate tombs with imported goods were afforded to the elite, with lower-class citizens being buried with little more than the clothes on their backs. You ponder this as you finish your maza. It's a sobering thought, this realization that even something as simple as breakfast could be a symbol of inequality. You take another sip of water, trying to wash away the slightly bitter taste of social stratification. Maybe you should have opted for the honey cakes. Just kidding. Sort of. But there's also a more unusual side to ancient Greek dining habits. You remember reading somewhere about melas zomos, a Spartan delicacy made from boiled pig's blood, vinegar, and salt. Apparently, it was so revolting that even the Spartans themselves couldn't stand it. If I'd ever been given the choice between being born Spartan or dying, joked one ancient commentator, I'd choose to die. You shudder at the thought. At least your maza is relatively palatable. Relatively. You also recall some rumors that the wealthier folks use peacock brains in their cooking as well, but you're choosing to not think about that. As you finish your breakfast, you notice a group of people gathering near the entrance to the courtyard. They're dressed in travel-worn clothes and carrying bundles of tools. They look like merchants or traders, perhaps come to sell their wares at the local market. You wonder what their breakfast looked like. Probably even simpler than yours. Maybe just a handful of olives and a piece of dried bread. One thing is certain, breakfast in ancient Greece was more than just a meal. It was a reflection of social status, economic realities, and the stark contrast between the haves and the have-nots. And you, my friend, have just gotten a small taste of that reality. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need a nap. All this history is making me sleepy. Plus, I've had enough maza to last a lifetime. it might actually be easier to sleep on. Alright, let's get comfy, settle in. Imagine the sun beating down on your face, not in that awful sunburn waiting to happen kind of way, but more like a warm blanket fresh from the dryer. You trudge toward the Agora, the marketplace, the central hub of, well, everything in this ancient city. Deep breaths. Smells like olives, sweat, and maybe a hint of donkey. Ah, the classics. You are immediately enveloped. It's a sensory overload, a chaotic symphony of bartering, bickering, and the occasional runaway chicken. Think of it as the world's oldest and probably least organized flea market. People are jostling past you, their tunics brushing against your legs. The air vibrates with voices shouting prices, hawking wares, and gossiping with enough enthusiasm to launch a small boat. You pass a stall overflowing with figs, plump, juicy, and looking suspiciously delicious. You resist the urge to snag one, because sticky fingers and ancient money don't mix. Plus, you're pretty sure that vendor has been eyeing you with the same suspicion you reserve for salespeople who use the phrase, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That's right, friend. Welcome to the Agora. This wasn't just a place to buy and sell stuff, you see. It was the social, political, and religious heart of the city. Think of it as a combination of your local shopping mall, town hall, and maybe a slightly less dramatic version of Twitter. Decisions that shaped the lives of everyone in the city were debated here. Rumors spread faster than a particularly virulent strain of the plague, and occasionally, someone would try to sell you a slightly used chariot that was definitely missing a wheel. Speaking of politics, remember democracy? Yeah, that whole radical idea of letting the people have a say in how things are run? Well, it was kind of a big deal here. Not everyone got a vote, mind you. Women, slaves, and foreigners were generally excluded from the fun. But hey, baby steps, right? Historians still argue whether this early form of democracy was truly democratic, or simply an oligarchy in disguise. Regardless, it was a pretty groundbreaking concept for its time. You weave your way through the crowd, past a group of philosophers arguing about the nature of reality. One of them is waving his arms around dramatically, which is a little distracting. You almost trip over a basket of sponges. Seriously? Who needs that many sponges? Are they expecting a particularly messy day? You push further in, past a butcher cheerfully hacking away at something. You decide not to look too closely. Let's just say you're going vegetarian for the next few minutes. Near the butcher, a cluster of people are gathered around a man with a booming voice. He's holding up a scroll and reading aloud. Public announcements, decrees, and the occasional juicy scandal were all disseminated this way. It's like the ancient equivalent of a push notification, except instead of your phone buzzing, you get a guy yelling in your ear. Speaking of scrolls, did you know that papyrus, the stuff they wrote on, was incredibly valuable? It was basically the ancient world's version of gold. You could even use it to pay taxes. Imagine trying to pay your taxes with a stack of printer paper today. You might get some weird looks, and possibly a visit from the IRS. I can hear it now. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some parchment. You sidestep a particularly grumpy-looking merchant who seems to be having a bad day. He's yelling about the price of olives, which apparently has skyrocketed due to some sort of olive shortage. You briefly wonder if this is the ancient equivalent of avocado toast causing a housing crisis. Ah, some things never change. You notice a group of children playing a game with knuckle bones, literally the bones from the knuckles of animals. Charming, right? It's like jacks, but with a slightly more rustic feel. And you thought your childhood toys were questionable. At least your parents didn't make you play with disarticulated phalanges. You pass a stall selling pottery, beautifully crafted vases, amphorae for storing wine, and little terracotta figurines of gods and goddesses. You admire the craftsmanship, the intricate designs, the sheer amount of dedication it must have taken to create these pieces. Then you almost knock over a stack of plates while trying to take a selfie. Oops. You wander further in, drawn by the sound of music. A group of musicians are playing a lively tune on lyres and aulos, a type of double-pipe instrument. It's surprisingly catchy, even if you don't understand the lyrics. You find yourself tapping your foot along to the rhythm. It's a welcome break from the constant barrage of noise. You can feel the sun getting hotter, the crowd getting denser. Your feet are starting to ache. You briefly consider buying a pair of sandals, but the ones on offer look suspiciously like they've been worn by at least 3 different people. Hard pass. Historians still argue whether the Agora was always a place of purely commercial activity, or if it also served as a site for religious ceremonies and festivals. Archaeological evidence suggests that it was likely a bit of both. It's like a combination shopping mall and cathedral, a truly multifaceted space. You spot a vendor selling, well, you're not entirely sure what they're selling. It looks like some sort of herbal remedy, but the ingredients are questionable. Dried lizards, powdered beetles, and something that vaguely resembles a toenail. You decide to steer clear. You're pretty sure you can find a more reputable source for your medicinal needs. Like, literally anywhere else. You glance up at the buildings surrounding the Agora. Temples dedicated to various gods and goddesses, stoas, covered walkways providing shelter from the sun and rain, and government buildings where important decisions were made. It's a reminder that this isn't just a marketplace, it's the center of a civilization. Now, here's a quirky tidbit for you: ancient graffiti. Yep, even back then, people were leaving their mark on public spaces. You might find inscriptions ranging from declarations of love to political slogans to, well, let's just say some things never change. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of bathroom stall poetry, only slightly less sanitized. You pass a stall selling incense. The fragrant smoke fills the air, a welcome contrast to the other, less pleasant smells of the Agora. You inhale deeply, feeling a sense of calm wash over you. For a moment, you forget about the heat, the noise, the crowds. You're transported to another time, another place. It's pretty zen. Suddenly, your moment of peace is shattered by a loud argument. 2 merchants are yelling at each other about something. You can't quite make out the words, but it sounds like it involves a disputed transaction and a very angry goat. You decide to move on before things escalate. You've seen enough street fights on YouTube to know where this is headed, and you'd rather not get caught in the crossfire. You notice a group of men huddled around a board game. They're intently focused, strategizing and making moves with small pieces. It looks like a complicated game, requiring skill and cunning. You briefly consider joining in, but you realize you have no idea how to play, and you're pretty sure you'd get trounced by these ancient gaming masters. You know, there were board games even back then. It's the OG settlers of Caton, but with potentially higher stakes. You've now spent hours navigating the Agora, and you are now beat. The sights, sounds, and smells have overwhelmed your senses. You feel like you've been transported back in time, but you're also desperately craving a shower and a cold drink. You decide it's time to escape the chaos and find a quieter place to rest. Alright, settle in, settle in. You're getting comfy, maybe got your favorite fuzzy blanket, or that weighted one that feels like a gentle hug. Good. Because we're diving into the slightly less than thrilling world of civic duties. Now, don't click away. I promise, it's not all dry textbooks and endless C-SPAN clips. We're gonna keep it engaging-ish. You trudge, perhaps reluctantly, to the polling station. The line snakes around the block, a testament to something. Either impressive civic engagement, or just that everyone waited until the last minute. You overhear snippets of conversations, impassioned debates about local ordinances, hushed anxieties about national policy, and at least one person complaining about the lack of decent coffee shops nearby. The air hums with a strange mix of anticipation and mild exasperation. This, my friend, is democracy in action. Or, democracy waiting in line. You finally reach the voting booth, a tiny cardboard sanctuary from the surrounding chaos. You grab a ballot, a seemingly endless scroll of names and propositions. You squint. You ponder. You maybe even remember that one government class you took back in college. Remember? The one you almost failed because you kept confusing bicameralism with, something completely unrelated. Good times. You mark your choices, carefully filling in those little ovals. You feel a fleeting sense of accomplishment, like you've actually done something. You feed the ballot into the machine, and it whirs and clicks, accepting your offering to the democratic gods. You exit the polling place, a slightly more informed and slightly more exhausted citizen. Now, let's be real. Participating in politics isn't just about voting. It's about, knowing things. Did you know that the United States Constitution is the oldest written and still in use national constitution in the world? Pretty impressive, right? We've been arguing about it for over 2 centuries, and it's still going strong. Or at least, mostly going strong. Historians still argue whether the Founding Fathers truly envisioned the modern political landscape. I mean, they probably thought we'd be using flying cars by now, not arguing about tweets. But it's also about understanding what the heck is even going on. That's where political participation comes in, and that means more than just voting. It's about engaging. It's also about knowing about some really quirky stuff. Did you know, for example, that in some countries, like Belgium, voting is mandatory? If you don't vote, you can actually get fined. Imagine that. You could skip voting, and then use that money to get a really good dessert. It's a tough choice, honestly. You settle down with your laptop, ready to delve into the fascinating world of political discourse. You bravely venture into the comments section of a news article. Deep breaths. You witness, let's just say it's not always a pretty sight. You see name-calling, misinformation, and enough all caps to make your eyes water. It's like a verbal mosh pit, except instead of moshing, people are just being mean. But even here, amidst the chaos, you see glimmers of genuine debate, of people actually trying to understand each other's perspectives. Maybe. Possibly. Okay, probably not. You decide to take a different approach. You attend a town hall meeting, hoping for a civilized discussion about local issues. You sit in the back, trying to avoid eye contact. The meeting starts off calmly enough, but it quickly devolves into a shouting match about, wait, what are they arguing about? Zoning regulations? The school budget? It's hard to tell. You feel a headache coming on. You make a mental note to bring earplugs next time. And maybe a stress ball. You might think to yourself, okay, this is all too much. Politics is stressful. I'm just gonna go binge watch cat videos and forget about the world. And honestly, I wouldn't blame you. But here's the thing. Remember when you complained about that pothole that swallowed your tire? Or that new development that blocked your favorite view? Or that weird smell coming from the sewage plant? Yeah, those are all influenced by politics. Everything is. That's why being engaged matters, even if it's just a little bit. You decide to take baby steps. You start by reading a news article from a reputable source. You fact-check it. You form your own opinion. You maybe even share it on social media, bracing yourself for the inevitable onslaught of comments. You then carefully explain that your opinion doesn't need to be a reason to insult others. Here's a random fact to keep you awake, by the way. The term gerrymandering. Drawing electoral district lines to favor one party over another, comes from Elbridge Gerry, the governor of Massachusetts in 1812, who signed a bill creating a district that looked like a salamander. Clever, huh? Politicians have been trying to rig the system for centuries, and historians still argue whether gerrymandering is a necessary evil or a fundamental flaw in democracy. Personally, I think it's both. You decide to write a letter to your elected official. You carefully craft your message, expressing your concerns about a particular issue. You proofread it 3 times. You hit send. You wait, and wait, and wait. Eventually, you receive a form letter in response. It's generic and personal and doesn't address any of your specific concerns. You feel slightly deflated, but you also realize that this is just one small step in a long process. You volunteer for a political campaign. You stuff envelopes, make phone calls, and knock on doors. You talk to strangers about issues you care about. Some people are receptive, others are hostile, and some just slam the door in your face. But you keep going because you believe in what you're doing. You also develop a newfound appreciation for comfortable shoes. Another fun fact, the lowest voter turnout in a U.S. presidential election was in 1792, when only about 6% of eligible voters participated. Back then, only white, male landowners could vote, and, well, probably only about 6% of them could be bothered. Historians still argue whether this low turnout was due to apathy, logistical challenges, or simply a lack of faith in the system. Probably all 3, honestly. You organize a protest. You gather with like-minded individuals to voice your opposition to a particular policy. You carry signs, chant slogans, and make your voices heard. It's empowering, exhilarating, and slightly terrifying. You feel like you're actually making a difference. Or at least, you're making a lot of noise. But noise is good, right? You even consider running for office yourself. You imagine yourself giving rousing speeches, championing the underdog, and making the world a better place. You quickly realize that you would have to spend all your time fundraising, attending boring meetings, and dealing with endless criticism. You decide to stick to volunteering, at least for now. You realize that citizenship duties aren't just about grand gestures and dramatic pronouncements. They're about the everyday things, the small acts of engagement that collectively shape our society. It's about staying informed, being respectful, even when it's difficult, and actively participating in the democratic process. Also, it's about occasionally making jokes. I feel like I'm not making enough jokes here. What do you call a lazy kangaroo? Pouch potato. There. Done. The thing is, being a citizen is kind of like being in a relationship. You have to put in the effort, even when you don't feel like it. You have to communicate, compromise, and sometimes even agree to disagree. And just like any relationship, it's not always easy. But it's worth it. Because in the end, it's about building a better future together. You finally collapse onto your couch, exhausted but satisfied. You've done your civic duty, at least for today. You've voted, you've volunteered, you've protested, or at least considered protesting, and you've engaged in political discourse, even if it was just in the comments section. You've earned a good night's sleep. Well, maybe not earned, but you definitely deserve it. And remember that you can also make a difference by just making a good, informed decision. Like remembering to buy some decent cookies for the next election volunteer group that's knocking on doors. You find yourself at the foot of the Acropolis, dust clinging to your sandals. Athens. The very air hums with intellectual energy, or maybe that's just the cicadas. Probably the cicadas. But let's pretend it's the intellectual energy. It's a much more compelling narrative. You take a deep breath, attempting to inhale some of that ancient wisdom, but mostly you just get a lungful of pollen and existential dread. It's potent stuff. You start to climb. The path is well-worn, trod by countless philosophers, students, and tourists just like you, all seeking something. Enlightenment? A decent Instagram photo? Hard to say. As you ascend, you can almost hear the echoes of debates past, Socrates challenging conventional wisdom, Plato scribbling away, Aristotle cataloging every single darn thing. They were busy guys. Think of them like the original podcasters, except instead of rambling into a microphone, they were rambling directly into the ears of impressionable young men. The Parthenon looms above, a majestic ruin, a testament to the glory that was, and a constant reminder that everything eventually crumbles. It's a bit depressing, honestly, but also quite photogenic. You pause, pull out your phone, and snap a few shots. Hashtag ancient Greece, hashtag philosophy, hashtag ruins, hashtag my life is so enlightened. Speaking of enlightenment, that was kind of the whole point of this Athenian experiment, wasn't it? A society dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, the questioning of everything, the relentless pursuit of truth. Or at least, the relentless pursuit of appearing to be smarter than everyone else. Hey, humans haven't changed that much. You see a group of young men arguing animatedly near a column. They look suspiciously like philosophy students, intense expressions, perpetually rumpled clothing, a faint aroma of stale coffee, and unwashed ambition. You edge closer, hoping to catch a snippet of their conversation. It's something about the nature of reality and the proper way to make a souvlaki. Ah, yes, the great philosophical questions. One of the most influential figures in this whole knowledge-seeking craze was, of course, Socrates. Now, Socrates was a bit of an oddball. He famously went around Athens questioning everyone he met, relentlessly probing their beliefs until they realized they didn't know nearly as much as they thought they did. Kind of like a really annoying uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. His method, known as the Socratic method, surprise, involved asking a series of questions to expose contradictions and lead people to their own understanding. Or more often, to admit they had no idea what they were talking about. Historians still argue whether Socrates was genuinely seeking truth or just enjoyed making people look foolish. I mean, maybe a little of both? He never wrote anything down himself, which is either a testament to his brilliance or a brilliant way to avoid being held accountable for anything he said. Everything we know about him comes from the writings of his students, primarily Plato. Which is kind of like getting your biography written by your biggest fan. And speaking of Plato, he was a student of Socrates, and arguably even more influential. Plato, the founder of the academy, basically, the first university. He was obsessed with the concept of forms, perfect, unchanging archetypes that exist in a higher realm. Think of it like the ideal cat. You've seen cats, sure, but have you seen the perfect cat, the essence of catness? Plato had a lot of thoughts about that. Anyway, according to Plato, everything we perceive in the physical world is just a shadow of these perfect forms. Which, if you think about it, is a pretty good excuse for why your toast always lands butter side down. It's just an imperfect manifestation of the ideal toast, you see? Now, here's a slightly quirkier bit of history. Plato supposedly hated democracy. He felt that the best rulers were philosopher kings, wise and virtuous individuals who were immune to the corrupting influence of power. Which is a lovely idea in theory, but you can see how that might not work out so well in practice. Imagine trying to elect a philosopher king in today's political climate. You'd end up with a reality TV star who quotes Nietzsche incorrectly. You move on, the sun beating down on your neck. You pass a small shrine dedicated to the muses, the goddesses of inspiration. You pause, offering a silent prayer for a sudden burst of creative brilliance. Or at the very least, for a decent Wi-Fi signal. You need to upload those Acropolis pictures, after all. And then there was Aristotle. Aristotle, the ultimate systematizer, the guy who classified everything: plants, animals, ethics, politics, rhetoric, you name it. Aristotle had a category for it. He was Plato's student, but he wasn't afraid to disagree with his teacher. He was a more practical thinker, more interested in the observable world than in abstract forms. He believed that knowledge came from observation and experience, not just from thinking really hard about ideal cats. Aristotle was also the tutor of Alexander the Great, which must have been an interesting dynamic. Can you imagine trying to teach ethics to a future conqueror? Now, Alexander, remember, when you're conquering Persia, try to be nice about it. Good luck with that. Here's a fun fact for you. Aristotle believed that women were naturally inferior to men. Yeah, even the great minds have their blind spots. It's a reminder that even the most enlightened thinkers are products of their time, and that progress is a slow, often frustrating process. Though, to be fair, his wife did run his school while he wasn't there, which has to count for something, right? You wander further, imagining yourself back in ancient Athens, strolling through the Agora, listening to the philosophers debate, soaking in the intellectual atmosphere. It must have been an incredible time to be alive, a period of unprecedented creativity and innovation. But it also had its downsides, of course. Slavery was rampant, women were largely excluded from public life, and sanitation was, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to drink the water. You stumble upon a small, unassuming stone bench tucked away in a quiet corner of the Acropolis. You sit down, weary from your climb. The view is breathtaking, the city stretching out below, the Aegean Sea shimmering in the distance. You close your eyes, trying to imagine what it must have been like to sit here thousands of years ago, contemplating the mysteries of the universe. You open your eyes and see a pigeon staring at you expectantly. Right. Back to reality. You rummage through your bag, find a stray cracker, and toss it to the bird. It gobbles it down with gusto. Even pigeons appreciate a good philosophical snack. The legacy of ancient Greek philosophy is still with us today. Their ideas about democracy, ethics, logic, and science continue to shape our world. They taught us the importance of questioning everything, of seeking knowledge, of striving for excellence. And they gave us a lot of really good quotes to put on inspirational posters. But they also left us with things like believing Earth was the center of the universe, and that sneezing expelled bad thoughts from your head. So it wasn't all perfect. And as you begin your descent, you reflect on your journey. You've climbed the Acropolis, breathed the slightly polluted air of Athens, and pondered the wisdom of the ancients. You may not be any closer to enlightenment, but you've got some great photos and a newfound appreciation for the importance of sunscreen. So, all in all, a pretty successful philosophical pilgrimage, wouldn't you say? Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to find some souvlaki. All this thinking has made me hungry. All right, settle in, friend. Pull up a comfy chair, maybe grab a lukewarm chamomile tea, because we are about to dive headfirst into the delightfully disgusting world of ancient hygiene and health. And trust me, after this, you'll be thanking every germ-killing hand sanitizer you've ever encountered. You trudge along a muddy path, the stench of uncollected waste assaulting your nostrils. Welcome to daily life, my friend. Forget aromatherapy candles. This is the real ancient world aroma. It's pungent. You're in a bustling Roman city, maybe even Rome itself, but don't let the grand architecture fool you. While senators are debating the fate of empires, the average Joe, or should I say, Titus, is navigating a labyrinth of filth. Now, the Romans get a lot of credit for their aqueducts, and rightfully so. Fresh water was a huge step up. But here's a fun fact. They mostly used it for public baths and fountains, not exactly for personal hygiene in every home. Imagine public baths where everything was floating around together. a communal soup of humanity, if you will. You might be cleaner after leaving the bath, but the process itself? Questionable. And speaking of questionable, let's talk teeth. Your teeth, to be precise. They probably ache. A lot. Toothbrushes, as we know them, weren't exactly a thing. Instead, you might be using a chew stick, a twig frayed at one end to scrub your pearly whites, or, well, yellowish whites. Toothpaste? Forget about it. Maybe you'd use a bit of baking soda if you were fancy, or some ground-up herbs. The result? Probably breath that could peel paint. On the plus side, everyone else's breath was just as bad, so you wouldn't really notice, right? Historians still argue whether bad breath, more than bad hygiene, caused more social conflict than recorded. Let's say you're not feeling so great. Maybe you have a cough, a fever, or, let's be honest, something far worse brewing inside you. Your options are, shall we say, limited. Forget popping down to your local pharmacy. Instead, you're likely consulting with a local healer or, more often than not, your grandmother. Her remedies involve a lot of herbs, some prayer, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of wishful thinking. One of the most pervasive medical theories in the ancient world was the concept of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health, it was believed, depended on maintaining a balance between these humors. If you were sick, it meant one of the humors was out of whack. The solution? Usually, bloodletting. Because what better way to feel better than by losing a significant amount of blood? You know what they say, a pint of blood is worth a pound of cure. Or was it the other way around? I always get those confused. And here's a quirky little fact for you. Doctors often used leeches to suck out the excess blood. Yes, leeches. Those slimy little bloodsuckers. It's like, oh, you're feeling weak? Let's make you more weak by draining your life force. You almost have to admire the logic, almost. Now, let's talk about childbirth. You're a woman about to bring new life into the world. Congratulations. But also, good luck. Childbirth in the ancient world was incredibly dangerous for both mother and child. Without modern medicine, complications were often fatal. Midwives were the unsung heroes, doing their best with limited knowledge and resources. Imagine the stress, the fear, the sheer physical endurance required. You know, I really should call my mother later. And if you survived childbirth, congratulations, you now had to raise a child in a world rife with disease. Infant mortality rates were staggering. Simple illnesses like diarrhea could be deadly. You're probably thinking, wow, this is all incredibly depressing. And you're right. But it's also important to understand the struggles of those who came before us. We owe them a lot, even if their hygiene practices leave something to be desired. I'm starting to understand why ancient statues don't smile. So what about preventing these horrible diseases? Well, prevention wasn't exactly a strong suit. They hadn't quite grasped the whole germ theory thing. People understood that illness could spread, but their explanations were often creative. Bad air, curses, angry gods, these were all considered potential culprits. Imagine trying to convince your neighbors that washing your hands might be more effective than sacrificing a goat to appease the gods. Good luck with that. One interesting belief was the idea of miasma, or bad air, as a cause of disease. People thought that foul odors, like those emanating from swamps or rotting corpses, could carry illness. This led to some interesting practices, like carrying around fragrant herbs or burning incense to ward off the miasma. I mean, at least their homes probably smelled nice-ish. Historians still argue whether miasma theory actually contributed to any accidental success at public health, like removing garbage. And let's not forget the role of superstition. Amulets, charms, and spells were all common tools in the fight against illness. People wore them to ward off evil spirits or to attract good luck. It might seem silly to us now, but in a world where so much was unknown, these beliefs offered a sense of control and hope. And hey, sometimes hope is all you have. Now, a light note. Did you know that in ancient Egypt, people sometimes used crocodile dung as a form of contraception? Yeah, you heard that right. Crocodile dung. Apparently, they believed it would block the sperm. I'm not a scientist, but I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. And also, EW. I can only imagine the conversations. Honey, did you remember to apply that, One area where ancient civilizations did make some progress was in public health. The Romans, for example, built elaborate sewer systems to carry waste away from cities. This was a major improvement over simply dumping everything in the streets. However, these systems weren't perfect. They often leaked, overflowed, and generally added to the overall ambience of urban unpleasantness. Still, it was a step in the right direction. And even with these public health measures, outbreaks of disease were common. Epidemics like the Antonine Plague and the Plague of Justinian swept through the ancient world, decimating populations. These plagues were devastating, killing millions and reshaping societies. It's a stark reminder of how vulnerable we are to the invisible world of microbes. So you see, life in the ancient world wasn't all togas and chariot races. It was also a constant battle against filth, disease, and ignorance. But even in the face of these challenges, people persevered. They developed remedies, built infrastructure, and found ways to cope with the realities of their time. And they did it all without the benefit of antibiotics, vaccines, or even basic sanitation. When you think about it that way, it's kind of amazing, isn't it? Now, I don't want to give the impression that everything was terrible. People still found joy in life. They celebrated, they loved, they created art and music. But it's important to remember the challenges they faced, the sacrifices they made, and the sheer resilience it took to survive in a world so different from our own. And with that, my friend, you've survived this journey into the murky depths of ancient hygiene and health. Hopefully, you've learned something new, maybe even gained a newfound appreciation for modern medicine and hand sanitizer. And most of all, I hope you haven't lost your appetite for chamomile tea. Okay, that's all, folks. All right, settle in, friend. Pull up a comfy chair, maybe grab a lukewarm chamomile tea, because we are about to dive headfirst into the delightfully disgusting world of ancient hygiene and health. And trust me, after this, you'll be thanking every germ-killing hand sanitizer you've ever encountered. You trudge along a muddy path, the stench of uncollected waste assaulting your nostrils. Welcome to daily life, my friend. Forget aromatherapy candles. This is the real ancient world aroma. It's pungent. You're in a bustling Roman city, maybe even Rome itself, but don't let the grand architecture fool you. While senators are debating the fate of empires, the average Joe, or should I say, Titus, is navigating a labyrinth of filth. Now, the Romans get a lot of credit for their aqueducts, and rightfully so. Fresh water was a huge step up. But here's a fun fact. They mostly used it for public baths and fountains, not exactly for personal hygiene in every home. Imagine public baths where everything was floating around together. A communal soup of humanity, if you will. You might be cleaner after leaving the bath, but the process itself? Questionable. And speaking of questionable, let's talk teeth. Your teeth, to be precise. They probably ache. A lot. Toothbrushes, as we know them, weren't exactly a thing. Instead, you might be using a chew stick, a twig frayed at one end to scrub your pearly whites, or well, yellowish whites. Toothpaste? Forget about it. Maybe you'd use a bit of baking soda if you were fancy, or some ground-up herbs. The result? Probably breath that could peel paint. On the plus side, everyone else's breath was just as bad, so you wouldn't really notice, right? Historians still argue whether bad breath, more than bad hygiene, caused more social conflict than recorded. Let's say you're not feeling so great. Maybe you have a cough, a fever, or, let's be honest, something far worse brewing inside you. Your options are, shall we say, limited. Forget popping down to your local pharmacy. Instead, you're likely consulting with a local healer or, more often than not, your grandmother. Her remedies involve a lot of herbs, some prayer, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of wishful thinking. One of the most pervasive medical theories in the ancient world was the concept of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health, it was believed, depended on maintaining a balance between these humors. If you were sick, it meant one of the humors was out of whack. The solution? Usually, bloodletting. Because what better way to feel better than by losing a significant amount of blood? You know what they say, a pint of blood is worth a pound of cure. Or was it the other way around? I always get those confused. And here's a quirky little fact for you. Doctors often used leeches to suck out the excess blood. Yes, leeches. Those slimy little bloodsuckers. It's like, oh, you're feeling weak? Let's make you more weak by draining your life force. You almost have to admire the logic, almost. Now, let's talk about childbirth. You're a woman about to bring new life into the world. Congratulations. But also, good luck. Childbirth in the ancient world was incredibly dangerous for both mother and child. Without modern medicine, complications were often fatal. Midwives were the unsung heroes, doing their best with limited knowledge and resources. Imagine the stress, the fear, the sheer physical endurance required. You know, I really should call my mother later. And if you survived childbirth, congratulations, you now had to raise a child in a world rife with disease. Infant mortality rates were staggering. Simple illnesses like diarrhea could be deadly. You're probably thinking, wow, this is all incredibly depressing. And you're right. But it's also important to understand the struggles of those who came before us. We owe them a lot, even if their hygiene practices leave something to be desired. I'm starting to understand why ancient statues don't smile. So what about preventing these horrible diseases? Well, prevention wasn't exactly a strong suit. They hadn't quite grasped the whole germ theory thing. People understood that illness could spread, but their explanations were often creative. Bad air, curses, angry gods, these were all considered potential culprits. Imagine trying to convince your neighbors that washing your hands might be more effective than sacrificing a goat to appease the gods. Good luck with that. One interesting belief was the idea of miasma, or bad air, as a cause of disease. People thought that foul odors, like those emanating from swamps or rotting corpses, could carry illness. This led to some interesting practices, like carrying around fragrant herbs or burning incense to ward off the miasma. I mean, at least their homes probably smelled nice-ish. Historians still argue whether miasma theory actually contributed to any accidental success at public health, like removing garbage. And let's not forget the role of superstition. Amulets, charms, and spells were all common tools in the fight against illness. People wore them to ward off evil spirits or to attract good luck. It might seem silly to us now, but in a world where so much was unknown, these beliefs offered a sense of control and hope. And hey, sometimes hope is all you have. Now, a light note. Did you know that in ancient Egypt, people sometimes used crocodile dung as a form of contraception? Yeah, you heard that right. Crocodile dung. Apparently, they believed it would block the sperm. I'm not a scientist, but I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. And also, EW. I can only imagine the conversations. Honey, did you remember to apply the, One area where ancient civilizations did make some progress was in public health. The Romans, for example, built elaborate sewer systems to carry waste away from cities. This was a major improvement over simply dumping everything in the streets. However, these systems weren't perfect. They often leaked, overflowed, and generally added to the overall ambience of urban unpleasantness. Still, it was a step in the right direction. And even with these public health measures, outbreaks of disease were common. Epidemics like the Antonine Plague and the Plague of Justinian swept through the ancient world, decimating populations. These plagues were devastating, killing millions and reshaping societies. It's a stark reminder of how vulnerable we are to the invisible world of microbes. So you see, life in the ancient world wasn't all togas and chariot races. It was also a constant battle against filth, disease, and ignorance. But even in the face of these challenges, people persevered. They developed remedies, built infrastructure, and found ways to cope with the realities of their time. And they did it all without the benefit of antibiotics, vaccines, or even basic sanitation. When you think about it that way, it's kind of amazing, isn't it? Now, I don't want to give the impression that everything was terrible. People still found joy in life. They celebrated, they loved, they created art and music. But it's important to remember the challenges they faced, the sacrifices they made, and the sheer resilience it took to survive in a world so different from our own. And with that, my friend, you've survived this journey into the murky depths of ancient hygiene and health. Hopefully you've learned something new, maybe even gained a newfound appreciation for modern medicine and hand sanitizer. And most of all, I hope you haven't lost your appetite for chamomile tea. Okay, that's all, folks. Okay, settle in, friend. Lean back. Let's talk family and gender. Specifically, how those two things were, shall we say, enthusiastically defined back in the day. You trudged through the cobbled streets, the smell of wood smoke and something vaguely unpleasant clinging to the damp air. You know that city smell? Even without cars, it's still there. Imagine replacing exhaust with, well, let's just say sanitation wasn't exactly a priority for everyone. You pull your shawl tighter, trying to block out the cacophony of noises. Merchants hawking their wares, children shrieking, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. It's a sensory overload. And everyone seems to be going somewhere with purpose. A purpose largely dictated by their family and their assigned role within it. You see a woman heading to the market, a basket laden with laundry balanced precariously on her head. Her husband probably expects clean linens and dinner on the table precisely when he returns from whatever he's been doing. And that's the thing, isn't it? Expectation. See, family life, back then, was less about expressing your individual identity and more about fitting into a preordained slide. Think of it like a particularly rigid game of Tetris. You are either the long straight piece, the male heir, naturally, or one of those awkward zigzag ones trying desperately to find a place. And good luck if you are that little square piece. No one really knows what to do with you. Mainstream history tells us that the concept of the nuclear family, as we vaguely understand it today, was already taking root. A mother, a father, and their biological offspring. Sounds quaint, doesn't it? But underneath that seemingly simple structure lay a complex web of power dynamics and societal expectations. Here's a quirky little tidbit for you. In some parts of Europe, particularly in peasant communities, young couples often practice something called night courting or bundling. Basically, the potential groom would spend the night in the same bed as the potential bride, often with a board separating them. It was considered a way to get to know each other within the boundaries of propriety. Imagine that as a first date. A slightly awkward sleepover with a plank of wood judging your every move. Good luck trying to Netflix and chill in that situation. Sorry, too soon? Historians still argue whether these practices were truly chaperoned and innocent or a thinly veiled opportunity for, let's say, premature commitment. Either way, it speaks volumes about the immense pressure placed on marriage and procreation. Your worth, particularly as a woman, was often tied to your ability to produce an heir. And what would tide you if that heir wasn't male? You might find yourself suddenly expendable. Not in a dramatic Game of Thrones sort of way, hopefully. But certainly, your social standing would plummet. And speaking of women, let's delve a little deeper into those gender roles. You see that woman hauling laundry? That was her life. Her worth measured in the cleanliness of her husband's shirts and the plumpness of her children's cheeks. Education? Not really a priority. Unless you were incredibly wealthy, your destiny was largely sealed at birth, marriage, motherhood, and servitude within the domestic sphere. You were basically a highly skilled, unpaid house elf. Except without the adorable pointed ears, probably. Men, on the other hand, were expected to be the breadwinners, the protectors, the providers. They held the power, both within the family and in society. Their word was law, their decisions final. You see that guy swaggering down the street, chest puffed out like a particularly arrogant pigeon? Yeah, that's the guy. He probably gets to make all the decisions, from what you eat for dinner to where you live. Lucky him. Now, before you get completely despondent, it's important to remember that these were general trends, not universal truths. There were certainly exceptions. There were women who defied expectations, who ran businesses, who wielded influence behind the scenes. We might not know all their names, but they were there, quietly chipping away at the patriarchal edifice. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Women in medieval Europe, particularly those in religious orders, often had access to education and intellectual pursuits that were denied to their lay counterparts. Convents became havens of learning where women could read, write, and even contribute to scholarly work. They were basically the original girl bosses, rocking the wimple and outsmarting the patriarchy one illuminated manuscript at a time. And for a quirky tidbit, did you know that in some cultures, a husband was legally obligated to provide his wife with a specific amount of, conjugal visits? Apparently, there were laws outlining the minimum frequency of marital relations. Imagine that. A judge ruling on bedroom etiquette. Talk about awkward. Your Honor, my client is simply not fulfilling his obligations. That was joke number 1, by the way. Did you catch it? Historians still argue whether these laws were intended to protect women's rights or simply to ensure the continuation of the family line. Either way, it highlights the pervasive societal interest in regulating even the most intimate aspects of marriage. You couldn't even complain about your husband's performance in the bedroom without involving the legal system. Talk about pressure. Now you might be thinking, this all sounds terribly unfair. And you wouldn't be wrong. But it's also crucial to understand these historical contexts without judging them solely through a modern lens. These were different times, with different values and different priorities. It doesn't excuse the inequalities, but it does provide a framework for understanding them. You observe a group of children playing in the street, a mix of boys and girls. The boys are engaged in a mock sword fight, while the girls are, well, they're mostly mimicking the activities of their mothers, stirring imaginary pots, tending to make-believe babies. Even in their games, the rigid gender roles are being reinforced. You see, it all started from a young age. Boys were encouraged to be strong, assertive, and independent. Girls were taught to be docile, obedient, and nurturing. You were trained to become your role, not to choose it. Here's a historical fact that might make you shudder. The concept of coverture legally subsumed a woman's identity under her husband's. In other words, upon marriage, a woman essentially ceased to exist as an independent legal entity. Her property, her earnings, Even her body belonged to her husband. She couldn't enter into contracts, sue anyone, or even own property in her own name. She was, quite literally, his property. That's joke number 2, but I'm sure it didn't elicit laughter. A quirky tidbit for you. In some medieval courts, a husband could legally beat his wife as long as he didn't cause permanent injury or death. The justification was that he had the right to discipline her. Charming, isn't it? Essentially, you could smack your wife around as long as you didn't break any bones. What a romantic ideal. Historians still argue whether this right of correction was widely practiced or simply a legal loophole that was rarely enforced. Regardless, the fact that it existed at all speaks volumes about the power imbalance within marriage. You feel a wave of empathy for the women of this era. Their lives were circumscribed by societal expectations, their choices limited, their voices often silenced. But you also recognize their resilience, their ingenuity, their quiet acts of defiance. They were the backbone of their families, the keepers of traditions, the secret architects of their own destinies. Look, I know this has been a bit of a downer. Talking about inequality and oppression isn't exactly a recipe for a good night's sleep. But it's important to remember where we came from, to understand the struggles that were fought, and to appreciate the progress that has been made. And, admittedly, that still needs to be made. Did I hit my joke quota yet? Maybe not. That's joke number 3, by the way. So take a deep breath. Remember that even in the darkest of times, there were glimmers of hope. And that you, dear friend, have the power to shape a future where family life and gender roles are defined not by rigid expectations, but by individual choice and mutual respect. So with that in mind, sleep well, friend. Okay, let's do lunch. You trudge into the break room, the fluorescent lights humming their omnipresent, soul-sucking tune. You're not alone, of course. A small gaggle of your colleagues are already here, each a picture of midday exhaustion. There's Sarah, diligently microwaving her Tupperware of leftovers from last night's lasagna. Dave hunched over his phone, scrolling through the endless abyss of social media while absent-mindedly munching on a sad-looking ham sandwich. And Emily, who's probably on her 3rd green juice of the day, radiating a disconcerting level of forced cheerfulness. You survey the scene, the smell of reheated garlic battling valiantly with the lingering scent of stale coffee. It's a culinary battlefield, this break room. You pull out your own lunch, a pre-made salad from the grocery store. Healthy, allegedly. Probably not. You peel back the plastic film, the crinkling sound echoing in the otherwise quiet room. It's a symphony of lunchtime despair. You find a spot at the table and settle in, ready to tackle the pile of wilted lettuce, suspiciously orange carrots, and rubbery grilled chicken. You know, the kind that tastes vaguely of smoke but also nothing? You poke at it with your plastic fork. Is this chicken even real? But here you are, partaking in a ritual as old as time itself, the midday meal. Historically, the concept of a structured lunch break is a relatively recent development, gaining traction in the 19th century alongside the rise of industrialization. Before that, folks just kinda grazed throughout the day, eating when they could, as they could. Now, there are laws regulating lunch breaks, at least in some places. Isn't it wild how a few centuries ago, it was survival by the skin of your teeth, and now it's negotiating with unions for mandatory soup time? Speaking of soup, back in the day, Romans often had a midday meal called prandium, usually consisting of bread, cheese, and maybe some olives. Pretty basic stuff. They probably didn't have to worry about the nutritional content of their sad desk salads. Of course, if they did have to worry about that, there probably wouldn't have been an empire. Makes you think, what wonders would we have accomplished without the modern lunch break? Anyway, you spear a piece of the aforementioned chicken and pop it in your mouth. It's as exciting as you expected, but hey, at least it's fuel. Fuel for more spreadsheets, more meetings, more emails. The engine of capitalism requires constant nourishment, or at least a constant intake of lukewarm salad. You continue to chew, your thoughts drifting. You know what's a strange historical fact? For a while there, it was thought that Kellogg's Corn Flakes was designed to prevent masturbation. The idea being that bland food would curb sexual desires. Can you imagine if that were true? The world would be an extremely boring place. Although, maybe your lunch is proof that someone, somewhere, still subscribes to that theory. One bite of this chicken, and you are pretty sure you won't be thinking about much of anything for a good while. Historians still argue whether the Kellogg brothers were actually that concerned with suppressing sexual urges, or if it was simply a convenient marketing ploy to sell more cereal. Either way, it's a reminder that even the simplest foods can have bizarre and unexpected origins. It all makes you wonder if in 200 years, some historian will be wondering if the avocado toast craze of the early 21st century was just some weird attempt to collectively signal wealth and sophistication via overpriced mashed fruit. Back to the break room, Dave is now watching a video of a cat playing the piano. Emily is lecturing Sarah about the importance of alkaline water. You're just quietly contemplating the mysteries of processed chicken. The symphony of break room noises continues, and you almost find it comforting. This shared experience of mundane sustenance, a brief respite from the daily grind. It's a weird sort of camaraderie forged in the crucible of shared lunchroom misery. Speaking of misery, you know what's even weirder than the Kellogg story? The 4-hour lunch law, once enforced in Spain, mostly during the Franco regime. Apparently, there was an official decree saying Spaniards had to take a whopping 4 hours for lunch. Can you imagine? It's more time than most people spend sleeping. Obviously, it wasn't all eating. It was about going home, having a family meal, maybe even taking a siesta. But still, 4 hours? You can barely get through your salad in 30 minutes. If your boss thought you disappeared for 4 hours every day, you'd be seeing the unemployment line faster than you can say, agua con gas. Historians still debate about the 4-hour lunch law. Some believe it was a genuine attempt to promote family values and traditional Spanish culture. Others think it was just a way to keep people docile and out of trouble. Whichever is true, it's certainly a far cry from the reality of most modern lunch breaks. You sigh and stab another carrot. It's surprisingly resilient. You idly wonder where these carrots come from, what their backstory is. Were they destined for greatness, perhaps a starring role in a fancy crudite platter? Or were they always destined to languish in a plastic container, alongside wilted lettuce and rubbery chicken? It's a profound thought, really. A carrot's life trajectory, determined by forces beyond its control. You, too, are just a leaf on the wind, floating on the currents of fate, occasionally stopping to eat lunch. You take another bite of salad. It's not getting any better. Maybe you should have gone with the lasagna. Although, judging by the way Sarah is silently weeping while she eats, that might not have been a better option. Is there a truly satisfying lunch to be had? Or is it just a perpetual quest for something that doesn't exist? As you finish your last bite of salad, your mind flashes back to a conversation you had with your grandmother. She grew up during the Great Depression, and she always talked about the importance of simple meals. She'd tell stories about how her family would make a huge pot of soup and eat it for days, stretching it out with whatever vegetables they could find. She said it wasn't glamorous, but it kept them alive. Thinking about it, you can't imagine your grandmother worrying about the sodium content of her canned goods or whether the chicken was free-range. She was just grateful to have something to eat. You remember reading somewhere that back in medieval Europe, peasants would often eat a kind of porridge made from whatever grains they had available. It was basically the medieval equivalent of oatmeal, and it was their main source of sustenance. They probably weren't posting pictures of it on Instagram, but it kept them going. You can see them now, huddled around a crackling fireplace, steam rising from their bowls of porridge, maybe sharing a funny story or two about the day. It wasn't fancy, but it was nourishing. You chuckled quietly to yourself. If you time traveled to medieval times with a box of protein bars, you'd be hailed as a god. And if you time traveled back here from medieval times, they'd take one look at your dirt-smeared face and probably call security. Oh, how far we've come. Historians still debate whether the diets of medieval peasants were actually as monotonous as they're often portrayed. Some argue that they were able to supplement their porridge with foraged fruits, vegetables, and even small animals. Others insist that their lives were a constant struggle for survival, with little room for culinary variety. It's all speculation, really, based on fragmented historical records and a healthy dose of interpretation. But it's fascinating to think about, nonetheless. You stand up, toss your empty plastic container into the recycling bin, and head back to your desk. Your stomach is vaguely full, your mind slightly more numb. Lunch is over. Back to the grind. As you return to your computer, you notice a coworker leaving for lunch. You exchange a knowing glance. Another soldier heading off to fight the battle of the midday meal. You stifle a yawn. Sleep calls, but not yet. And with that, you leave, armed with the power of lukewarm lettuce. You'll be back, though. You always come back. You might even bring lasagna tomorrow. Hopefully, Sarah's over it by then. All right, settle in, friend. Let's drift into the world of gods, myths, and theater, ancient style. Picture this. It's warm, maybe a little too warm, and the scent of incense hangs heavy in the air. You trudge through a bustling marketplace, vendors hawking everything from olives to, well, probably more olives. Seriously, did these people eat anything else? You sidestep a donkey cart piled high with amphorae, those clay storage jars you always see broken in museums, and you wonder how many of them actually made it to their destination intact. Probably not that many. You're on your way to a religious festival. These things were a big deal back then, way bigger than Comic-Con, and with significantly fewer people dressed as anime characters, though, who knows, maybe someone was cosplaying as Zeus. We just don't have the pictures. These festivals weren't just about piety, they were about community, about letting loose, and about showing off. The wealthy would sponsor lavish sacrifices, you know, the kind involving a lot of animals, to curry favor with the gods. Speaking of which, can you imagine the Yelp reviews for the gods? Zeus 2 stars. Lightning bolts were excessive, and the buffet was subpar. One of the key figures in these religious practices was, of course, the priest. Now, priests weren't always the dour, serious types you might imagine. Some were, sure, but others were, let's just say, colorful characters. Apparently, in some cults, the priests of Cybele, the mother goddess, would castrate themselves as an act of devotion. Ouch. Talk about commitment. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or limited to certain communities, but the fact that it existed at all is, noteworthy. As you approach the temple, you hear the rhythmic chanting of hymns. The air vibrates with the sound, a low, resonant hum that seems to penetrate your very bones. You see people offering gifts to the gods, fruit, flowers, and small clay figurines. The temple itself is impressive, a massive structure of marble and stone, gleaming in the sunlight. You can't help but feel a sense of awe, even if you're secretly wondering if the gods are really paying attention, or if they're just up there, like binge-watching reality TV. After the religious ceremony, you head to the theater. It's a grand open-air amphitheater, carved into the hillside. The seats rise in tiers, capable of holding thousands of spectators. The plays, whether tragedies or comedies, are a central part of the entertainment scene. The actors wear masks. which amplify their voices and allow them to play multiple roles. This was crucial, especially considering that, in ancient Greece, women weren't allowed to perform on stage. All those female characters? Played by dudes. Try wrapping your head around that one. Tragedy was the serious business. Think Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, a play about a guy who, spoiler alert, unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother. Heavy stuff, right? The goal of tragedy, according to Aristotle, was to evoke catharsis, a purging of emotions through pity and fear. So, you basically paid money to have an emotional breakdown. Sounds like a good deal, actually. Comedy, on the other hand, was all about the laughs. Aristophanes was the master of the form, writing plays that were often satirical and politically charged. His play Lysistrata, for example, tells the story of Athenian women who withhold sex from their husbands in order to end the Peloponnesian War. Talk about a power play. The ancient Greeks, like us, appreciated a good dirty joke, except theirs were probably written in iambic pentameter. Historians still argue whether the humor was actually funny by modern standards. Now, here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some scholars believe that ancient Greek actors may have used hallucinogenic drugs to enhance their performances. Can you imagine Hamlet on shrooms? To be or not to be? Whoa, man, what even is being? While there's no concrete evidence to support this theory, it certainly adds another layer of intrigue to the world of ancient theater. Between acts, you might enjoy some musical entertainment. The lyre, a small stringed instrument, was a popular choice. Music was often accompanied by dancing, which could range from graceful and elegant to wild and frenzied. Some dances were even associated with specific gods. For example, the dithyramb, a choral hymn sung in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, involved a lot of energetic movement and, presumably, a fair amount of spilled wine. You might also witness a gladiatorial contest. While these events are more commonly associated with ancient Rome, they were also popular in some parts of the Greek world. Gladiators were often slaves or prisoners of war, forced to fight to the death for the entertainment of the crowds. It was a brutal spectacle, but one that drew large audiences. The ancient world was not known for its sensitivity. As the sun begins to set, you start to feel the effects of a long day spent in the ancient world. You're tired, hot, and probably a little bit sunburned. But you're also strangely exhilarated. You've witnessed religious rituals, watched a tragic play, laughed at a comedy, and maybe even caught a glimpse of a gladiator fight. It's been a day of immersion, a journey into a world that is both familiar and utterly foreign. The ancient Greeks were, in many ways, just like us. They sought entertainment, they worshipped their gods, and they tried to make sense of the world around them. Just hopefully without the Oedipus complex stuff. One mainstream historical fact is that ancient Greek theater began in Athens around the 6th century BC. Before you go, let's talk about mimes. They were like the ancient version of street performers, and they were super popular, especially in the later periods. Mimes would act out scenes from everyday life, often with a healthy dose of slapstick and improvisation. They didn't wear masks like the actors in formal plays, so you could actually see their facial expressions, which probably helped with the whole comedic timing thing. They were sort of the ancient equivalent of YouTube pranksters, except, live and without the internet backlash. You couldn't cancel a mime in ancient Greece. Well, you probably could, but it involved rocks. As the stars emerge, and the cicadas start their evening chorus, you realize that you've spent the day living a different life. You've tasted the olives, so many olives, smelled the incense, and heard the voices of actors echoing across the centuries. And maybe, just maybe, you've caught a glimpse of what it was like to be entertained in the ancient world. It's time to head back, now, with a pocket full of memories and maybe a slight headache from all the philosophical pondering. Remember, history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about the stories, the laughter, and the shared experiences that connect us to the past. One last thought before you drift off to sleep. The ancient Greeks didn't invent the popcorn, but maybe they should have. Right, settle in, settle in. Let's talk about something super relaxing, war. Yeah, I know, it's not exactly a lavender bath, but in ancient Greece, warfare was as much a part of life as, well, olives and feta. And probably a lot less tasty, depending on what kind of army rations you were getting. You trudge along, sandals slapping against the dusty ground. The sun, a relentless jerk, beats down on your bronze helmet. It's heavy, smells faintly of sweat and yesterday's lunch, and frankly, makes your head itch. You're part of the Hoplite Phalanx, the backbone of your Polis S army. It's not glamorous. Think less, 300. Abs and more, 300. Guys crammed shoulder to shoulder, praying the dude next to you isn't having a bad day. This isn't some professional army, mind you. You're a citizen soldier. A farmer, a potter, maybe even a particularly ambitious sandal maker, called up when duty calls. One day you're haggling over the price of figs. The next you're wielding a spear, hoping you don't become someone else's fig filling. It's all vary. From farm to battlefield, back to farm, maybe. Your aspies, the large, round shield, weighs a ton. Seriously, it's like carrying a small, ornately decorated coffee table into battle. Speaking of decoration, yours is a simple bronze affair. Some guys get fancy. The Spartans, now there's a story, they'd paint symbols on theirs, often the letter lambda, or Laconia, the region around Sparta. It's a subtle way to say, yeah, we're Spartan, fear us. Very intimidating. Other hoplites might choose personal emblems or even crude jokes, depending on their, shall we say, artistic inclination. The spear, the dory, is your primary weapon. Imagine a sturdy, wooden shaft, topped with a sharp iron point. Simple, effective, and surprisingly good at poking holes in people. You grip it tightly, the wood warm and slightly rough in your hand. You've practiced this countless times. Thrust forward, aim for the soft bits, try not to think about what happens next. And then, there's the short sword, the Xiphos, a backup weapon for when things get really close and personal. It's usually bronze or iron, double-edged, and about 2 feet long, just the right size for a quick stab in the ribs. Think of it as your, oops, I dropped my spear, insurance policy. The phalanx is the key. It's all about cohesion. Each soldier protects the one to his left with his shield, creating a wall of bronze and steel. The goal is to push forward, break the enemy line, and rout them. It sounds simple, but in the heat of battle, with the dust, the noise, and the terror, it's anything but. You hear the Alos player, a musician who's blasting out a tune that is supposed to be motivating, but mostly just sounds like a really, really loud, slightly off-key goose. Before the battle even begins, there's the pre-battle rituals. Sacrifices to the gods, prayers for victory, and, if you're lucky, a decent meal. The idea is to appease the gods and boost morale, but honestly, sometimes it just feels like delaying the inevitable. There was this one time, you remember, when a soothsayer predicted victory based on the entrails of a chicken. The chicken probably disagreed. You lost that battle, by the way. Maybe chickens know something we don't. Historians still argue whether the hoplite phalanx was as invincible as some accounts suggest. Some point to its limitations, its vulnerability to flanking maneuvers, its dependence on level ground, while others emphasize its effectiveness in pitched battles. But one thing is certain, it was a formidable force that shaped the course of Greek history for centuries. Now you might be thinking, all this sounds like a man's world. And you wouldn't be entirely wrong. Ancient Greek society was pretty patriarchal, to put it mildly. But that doesn't mean women had absolutely no role to play in warfare. Think of the women of Sparta. They were known for their physical fitness and their strong opinions. They weren't exactly marching into battle alongside the men, but they were expected to be tough, independent, and capable of defending their homes. Their role was to produce strong sons to be soldiers. It was a pretty utilitarian view of motherhood. And then there's the occasional example of women who did take up arms. There are stories, often shrouded in myth and legend, of female warriors and heroines. The Amazons, for instance, a tribe of fierce female warriors who supposedly lived on the fringes of the known world. Probably just legends, but you never know, do you? And let's not forget the Hittite. These weren't just prostitutes, they were often educated and sophisticated women who moved in the highest circles of society. And some of them, it is said, would follow armies on campaign, providing, well, comfort to the soldiers. But some even claim they offered strategic advice, gathered intelligence, and even participated in combat. Now, whether that's fact or fiction is another question, but it's certainly an intriguing thought. But back to you, standing there in the phalanx, heart pounding, sweat dripping into your eyes. You see the enemy approaching. You can hear their shouts, their war cries. It's a terrifying moment, but you stand your ground. You're part of something bigger than yourself. You're defending your polis, your family, your way of life. The battle begins. The clash of shields, the roar of the crowd, the screams of the wounded. It's a chaotic mess of bronze and blood. You thrust your spear, again and again, trying to find a gap in the enemy line. You push forward, shoulder to shoulder with your comrades. You're exhausted, terrified, but you keep going. You get bumped from the side by your neighbor. Turns out he was too busy thinking about the honeyed barley cakes his wife makes for him. Honestly, it's a bad time to daydream about snacks, mate. Days turn into weeks. The campaign drags on. Sieges, skirmishes, the occasional full-scale battle. You miss home, you miss your family, you miss a decent bath. Seriously, you can practically smell yourself from here. Warfare in ancient Greece wasn't just about battles on land. The sea played a crucial role as well. The Athenian navy, in particular, was a force to be reckoned with. Imagine the trireme, a sleek, fast warship powered by rows of oarsmen. It was a technological marvel of its time, capable of ramming enemy ships and dominating the Aegean Sea. They were the Ferraris of the ancient world. Naval battles were brutal affairs. Ships would ram each other, oars would snap, sailors would be thrown into the sea. And then there were the boarding parties, who would leap onto the enemy ship and engage in hand-to-hand combat. It was all very wet and stabby. One quirky tidbit is that ships sometimes had decorations painted on their prows. It's believed that these were meant to ward off evil spirits and bring good luck. Like a floating, mythological googly eye. You'd think a solid ram would be more effective, but what do I know? Warfare wasn't just about soldiers and sailors. It also involved engineers, artisans, and other specialists. Engineers designed siege engines, like catapults and battering rams, to break down city walls. Artisans crafted weapons and armor. And then there were the supply lines, which were essential for keeping the army fed and equipped. You can't conquer the world on an empty stomach. And let's not forget the role of diplomacy and alliances. Ancient Greece was a patchwork of independent city-states, constantly vying for power and influence. Forming alliances was crucial for survival, and breaking them was sometimes just as important. It was a complex game of political chess, with war as one of the key pieces. You manage to survive. Against all odds, you make it back home. You're exhausted, scarred, and probably a little bit traumatized. But you're alive. You're a hero. At least, that's what everyone tells you. You return to your farm, to your family. You try to forget the horrors of war. You try to focus on the simple things, the smell of the earth, the taste of fresh bread, the laughter of your children. But the memories linger. The faces of the dead, the screams of the wounded, the constant fear. And you know deep down that it's only a matter of time before you'll be called upon to defend your polis once again. Because in ancient Greece, war was always just around the corner. And you'll probably be just as unprepared for it as you were this time. But at least you'll have a slightly better idea of what to expect. You shuffle your sandaled feet, the dust of Attica coating your toes. The sun beats down, merciless and unwavering. You're on your way to Lorient, a name that probably doesn't ring any bells for you, unless you're, like, really into ancient Greek geography. But Lorient? That's where the silver mines were. And silver, well, silver was the lifeblood of Athens, the fuel that kept the democratic engine sputtering along. Think of it. Silver paid for the triremes, those sleek warships that dominated the Aegean. Silver paid for the Parthenon, that magnificent temple that still makes tourists gasp today. Silver lined the pockets of politicians. Okay, maybe not line them, but you get the idea. Silver was kind of a big deal. But here's the thing, the slightly uncomfortable truth that you tend to gloss over in those glossy travel brochures. That silver didn't mine itself. Little Pixis didn't magically conjure it from the earth. No, that silver was ripped, hacked, and dragged from the ground by the sweat and blood of slaves. You're thinking, oh, here we go with the heavy stuff. But hey, gotta keep it real, right? You see them now, a line of figures silhouetted against the harsh glare of the mine entrance. Men, women, children, all shackled together, their faces grimy with dust and exhaustion. They're not exactly dressed for the occasion, let's just say. You're probably rocking a comfier outfit right now, and you're just listening to this. You try to make eye contact, but they avert their gaze. They've learned that lesson the hard way. Don't attract attention. Don't make trouble. Just keep digging. Because if you don't, well, the overseer has a whip, and he's not afraid to use it. Think of him as the ancient Greek equivalent of that one manager at your first summer job who just seemed to enjoy making everyone's lives miserable. The conditions in the mines are, shall we say, less than ideal. The tunnels are narrow, claustrophobic, and poorly ventilated. The air is thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. The rock is hard, unforgiving. And the work is backbreaking, soul-crushing. It's the kind of job where you age 10 years in one. And the life expectancy? Let's just say you wouldn't want to put Lorient Silver Miner on your LinkedIn profile. And it's not just the silver mines, of course. Slavery was woven into the very fabric of ancient Greek society. You'd find slaves working on farms, in workshops, even in private homes. They were cooks, cleaners, tutors, scribes. They were the invisible backbone of the Athenian Golden Age. Historians still argue whether the Athenian economy could have functioned without slavery at all. It's a question that haunts the marble halls of academia. You might be picturing burly guys with bulging biceps cracking whips, and that definitely happened. But slavery in ancient Greece wasn't always about brute force. Sometimes it was more subtle, more insidious. You could be a highly skilled artisan, captured in war, and forced to use your talents for the benefit of your new master. It's kind of like being a freelance artist these days, except without the freedom or the pay. At least you get exposure, right? Just kidding. Exposure doesn't pay the bills. The number of slaves in Athens varied over time. Estimates range from a third to even more than half the population. That's a lot of people living under forced servitude. Think about walking down a street in modern-day Athens and knowing that every other person you see is living without rights, without freedom. It puts a bit of a damper on the souvlaki, doesn't it? And where did all these slaves come from? Well, war was a major supplier. Defeated armies were often enslaved en masse. Piracy was another source. Imagine being kidnapped while you were just trying to catch some rays on the beach. Your idyllic vacation suddenly takes a very dark turn. And sometimes, people were simply sold into slavery by their families, driven by poverty or desperation. It was a brutal world, no doubt. It's tempting to think of slavery as something that happened back then, something that's safely confined to the history books. But the truth is, forced labor still exists in various forms around the world today. From human trafficking to debt bondage, the exploitation of vulnerable people continues to be a global problem. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Kind of makes you want to donate to a good cause, or at least buy ethically sourced chocolate. Now, let's not paint with too broad a brush. Not all slave owners were cruel and sadistic. Some treated their slaves relatively well. Some even granted them freedom after years of service. There are stories of slaves who managed to amass their own wealth and even purchase their own freedom. Think of it as the ancient Greek version of winning the lottery, except instead of winning money, you win your life back. Although, let's be honest, a lottery win is pretty life-changing. And there were even some instances of slaves organizing rebellions, although these were rare and usually unsuccessful. Imagine the courage it would take to stand up against your oppressors, knowing that the consequences could be dire. It's the kind of bravery that makes you want to stand up and cheer, even if you're just sitting on your couch, listening to a podcast. Here's a quirky little fact for you. Some scholars believe that Aesop, the famous fabulist, was himself a slave. That's right, the guy who wrote all those charming animal stories might have been living a life of servitude. Talk about irony. It's like finding out that your favorite children's author was secretly a grumpy old curmudgeon. And here's a slightly more controversial theory. Some historians have suggested that the Athenian concept of democracy was actually dependent on slavery. The idea is that having a large slave population freed up Athenian citizens to participate in politics and intellectual pursuits. It's a disturbing thought, isn't it? That the very foundation of Western democracy might have been built on the backs of enslaved people. It's the kind of paradox that makes your head spin. You're walking away from Lorient now, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape. The cries of the slaves fade into the distance, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. You feel a mix of emotions, sadness, anger, maybe even a little guilt. It's not easy to confront the darker aspects of history, but it's important, because by understanding the past, we can hopefully build a better future. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate the freedoms we often take for granted. Now, maybe you can go enjoy that souvlaki, but with a little more perspective. You trudge back toward the cabin, the last vestiges of daylight painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and weary orange. The air has taken on a definite chill, a subtle reminder that nature, for all its beauty, doesn't offer participation trophies for feeling profound. You're feeling something. Maybe a little lighter than this morning, maybe just hungry. Probably both. Your boots crunch on the gravel path, a sound that feels both comforting and oddly amplified in the increasing quiet. You can almost feel the weight of the day settling, a physical sensation in your shoulders and the back of your neck. You resist the urge to check your phone. That siren song of digital distraction can wait. You've made it this far unplugged, and you're strangely determined to keep the streak alive, if only for a few more hours. As you approach the cabin, a wisp of smoke curls from the chimney, promising warmth and the aroma of something vaguely edible. You hope. You are not, by any stretch of the imagination, a culinary genius. The extent of your cooking prowess generally involves not setting things on fire, a skill you consider to be vastly underrated in modern society. You push open the heavy wooden door and are immediately enveloped in a wave of warmth. The fire crackles merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Inside, your dinner awaits. A simple, read, incredibly easy stew simmered in a cast iron pot, radiating a homely, rustic fragrance. Okay, maybe you are a culinary genius. Or at least, you're smart enough to buy pre-made stew mixes. You ladle a generous portion into a bowl, the steam rising to meet your face, and settle into a worn armchair near the fire. The stew, surprisingly, is delicious. Or maybe you're just ravenous. It's probably a bit of both. As you eat, your mind begins to wander, reflecting on the day's experiment, the walk, the silence, the forced disconnection. It's definitely been different. You consider the historical context of your retreat. Imagine living centuries ago, not just without technology, but without consistent access to basic necessities. People back then might have considered your struggle to be quite the hilarious first-world problem. Historians still argue whether the average peasant in medieval Europe had a better or worse quality of life than a modern office worker, a debate fueled by the difficulty of accurately measuring things like happiness and subjective well-being across vast swathes of time. You remember reading something about flagpole sitting, a bizarre craze during the 1920s, where people competed to see who could sit on a flagpole for the longest period. Some even attempted to break records by living atop flagpoles for weeks, braving the elements and the sheer boredom. Compared to that, your day of introspection seems almost reasonable. Almost. The stew disappears, leaving you feeling content, if not exactly enlightened. Now comes the part you've been both anticipating and dreading, the philosophical reflection. You pull out the notebook and pen you packed. Yes, an actual pen, not a stylus, and stare blankly at the page. Okay, deep breaths. You aren't Schopenhauer trying to formulate the world as will and representation level of insight. Just jot down some thoughts. Anything. You start by summarizing the day. It feels like a forced march into the wilderness of your own mind. You recall some of the observations you scribbled down during your nature walk, including a remarkably insightful note stating trees are tall. Profound. You then try to delve a little deeper. What have you learned? What has shifted? What, if anything, has changed? The answers, frustratingly, remain elusive. You feel a bit like an archaeologist sifting through dirt, hoping to unearth some profound artifact of self-discovery. Instead, you mostly find more dirt. You remember reading about the concept of the philosopher's walk, popularized by thinkers like Aristotle, who supposedly strolled around the Lyceum while lecturing his students. The act of walking was believed to stimulate thought and foster intellectual creativity. You did a lot of walking today. And thinking? Then there was the curious case of Diogenes, the ancient Greek philosopher who lived in a barrel and famously told Alexander the Great to get out of his sunlight. Now that was a commitment to a particular lifestyle. Your day of quiet contemplation pales in comparison. You wouldn't even dream of telling your boss to get out of your sunlight. You begin to consider the nature of modern distractions. The constant stream of information, notifications, and social media updates. It's like trying to listen to a symphony while someone is simultaneously blasting heavy metal and reading a grocery list through a megaphone. No wonder it's hard to hear your own thoughts. You jot down a few more half-formed ideas, snippets of observations, and vague philosophical ponderings. The page remains largely blank, but at least it's not entirely empty. Maybe the process of reflection is less about arriving at profound conclusions and more about simply making the effort to look. You close the notebook and stretch, feeling the satisfying ache in your muscles. The fire is starting to die down, casting long, flickering shadows that dance on the walls like mischievous spirits. You throw another log on the embers, watching as the flames slowly lick at the dry wood. There's a certain primal comfort in watching a fire. It's a connection to something ancient and fundamental, something that predates smartphones, social media, and the relentless demands of modern life. It's a reminder that, at the core, we are all just creatures of earth, fire, and water, seeking warmth, sustenance, and a moment of peace. Historians still argue whether fire was first purposefully created by Homo erectus or Homo habilis, but it seems that no matter the species, fire has been a cornerstone of society ever since its discovery. Before you blow out the lantern, you remember one last quirky tidbit. A few years ago, a man in Japan claimed he had not slept for more than a decade by training himself to exist on almost no sleep, believing that sleep was an unnecessary waste of time. It made you wonder what kind of philosophical reflections he had. The fire crackles softly, the only sound in the cabin. You are tired, but also strangely content. You blow out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness, save for the faint glow of the embers in the hearth. The quiet settles around you like a soft blanket, a welcome contrast to the constant noise of the outside world. As you drift off to sleep, you realize that you may not have unlocked the secrets of the universe, but you have, at least, managed to survive a day without the internet. And in the grand scheme of things, that's a victory worth celebrating. It also made you realize that, while unplugging is difficult, it is possible. And, in its own weird way, necessary. You also realize, with a slightly self-deprecating smile, that you'll probably be checking your email first thing in the morning. Baby steps. You trudge along the dusty road, the sun beating down on your neck like a blacksmith's hammer. Each step kicks up a small cloud of ochre dust, coating your sandals and the hem of your tunic. Honestly, you're pretty sure you swallowed half of Crete at this point. The air smells like olives and goat, a combination that's somehow both comforting and vaguely unsettling. It's like that sweater your grandma knits you every year. You appreciate the effort, but it definitely clashes with your wardrobe. You're headed to Knossos, and the stories buzzing around the taverns have painted a pretty vivid picture. You've heard whispers of labyrinthine corridors, frescoes that practically breathe, and a palace so grand it makes your tiny village hut feel like a pigeon coop. It all sounds a bit much, frankly. You've seen impressive buildings before. Your cousin's got a pretty sweet 2-story goat shed, if we're being honest. But this is Knossos, and everyone seems to think it's a big deal. Plus, you need to ask the oracle about that rash on your arm. You've tried everything: honey, olive oil, even chanting to the moon. Nothing works. You're starting to suspect it's a divine punishment for that time you accidentally tripped over the priest during the harvest festival. Yeah, that was awkward. You really should send him a fruit basket or something. As you walk, you can't help but notice the ubiquitous presence of religious symbols. Miniature clay figurines of the snake goddess adorn every other doorway, and small altars dedicated to various deities are tucked into every nook and cranny. The Minoans, you've heard, were a deeply spiritual people. Historians still argue whether this profound religiosity fostered a more peaceful society or, conversely, whether it contributed to internal instability and vulnerability to invasion. Either way, it's clear they took their gods seriously. Unlike some people you know who forget to offer libations on important feast days. Yeah, we're looking at you, Theron. You adjust the small amulet around your neck, a crude carving of a bull. It's supposed to ward off evil spirits and bring good luck. You're not entirely convinced, but hey, can't hurt, right? Besides, it was a gift from your Auntie Elpida, and you wouldn't want to hurt her feelings. She gets really intense about this stuff. Last time you questioned the efficacy of her charms, she threatened to curse your next harvest. The idea of curses is a constant background hum in your life. Everything seems imbued with potential for divine favor or retribution. Spill your wine. That's Poseidon getting annoyed. Find a strangely shaped pebble? It's a sign from Zeus. Stub your toe? Well, that's just plain bad luck, but you still apologize to the road just in case. You know, cover all your bases. It's exhausting, but you'd rather be safe than sorry. Imagine being smoked by the gods for forgetting your prayers. You shudder. That's a very bad Yelp review waiting to happen. As you approach Knossos, the sheer scale of the palace begins to dawn on you. It's not just a big building, it's a sprawling complex of courtyards, chambers, and stairways. It's like a small city unto itself. No wonder people get lost in there. You can just imagine wandering around for days, eventually resorting to eating the decorative shrubbery just to survive. The famed labyrinth, you've been told, isn't just a myth. It's based on the actual layout of the palace, which is so convoluted that even the architects probably got lost from time to time. That sounds like a design flaw, honestly. The palace is teeming with people. Merchants hawking their wares, priests chanting hymns, servants scurrying about with trays of food and drink. The air is thick with the sounds of commerce and religious fervor. It's a sensory overload. You kind of miss the quiet solitude of your village. You push your way through the crowd, trying to keep your sandals from getting trampled. Someone bumps into you, nearly knocking you off your feet. Watch it, you shout, but they're already gone, swallowed by the throng. Rude. You eventually find your way to the oracle's chamber, a small, dimly lit room filled with incense and hushed whispers. The oracle herself is a gaunt woman with wild eyes and tangled hair. She sits on a low stool, surrounded by offerings of fruit and flowers. She looks like she could use a nap, honestly. You wait your turn, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in your stomach. What if the oracle tells you that you're cursed? What if the gods are angry with you for some unknown transgression? Finally, it's your turn. You approach the oracle hesitantly, clutching your small offering of honey cakes. Great oracle, you say, your voice trembling slightly, I seek your wisdom. She looks at you with unnerving intensity. Her eyes seem to bore right through you, seeing all your secrets, all your fears, all your questionable life choices. It's like having your entire internet history read out loud in public. Speak, she croaks, her voice raspy like dry leaves. You explain your problem, the stubborn rash on your arm that refuses to go away. You tell her about the honey, the olive oil, the chanting to the moon. You even confess about tripping over the priest. You lay it all out there, hoping for some sort of divine insight. You kind of feel like you're in a therapy session, but with more incense and fewer couches. The oracle listens patiently, her eyes fixed on you. When you're finished, she closes her eyes and begins to sway gently back and forth. She mutters something unintelligible under her breath, then falls silent. The silence stretches on, punctuated only by the crackling of the incense. You start to wonder if she's fallen asleep. Maybe this whole oracle thing is just an elaborate scam. Suddenly, she opens her eyes and speaks, her voice now clear and strong. The gods are not displeased with you, she says. Your rash is not a punishment, but a warning. A warning? What does that even mean? You open your mouth to ask, but she raises a hand to silence you. The warning speaks of change. A great upheaval is coming to this land. Prepare yourself. She then says a bunch of other things, like how you need to start eating more figs, and how the color green suits you. It was honestly a real roller coaster of an experience. You leave the oracle's chamber feeling more confused than ever. A great upheaval? What kind of upheaval? An earthquake? A volcanic eruption? A really bad harvest? You've read that the Minoan civilization, despite its advanced culture and impressive achievements, mysteriously collapsed around 1450 BC. Historians still argue whether this collapse was due to a volcanic eruption on the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, an invasion by the Mycenaeans, or a combination of factors. That volcano is no joke, You've heard tales about the island being completely uninhabited for hundreds of years following the eruption. The idea is terrifying, and it makes you wonder whether this impending doom has anything to do with that event. You wander through the palace grounds, trying to make sense of the oracle's words. The bustling crowds, the magnificent architecture, the pervasive sense of religious fervor, it all seems fragile, ephemeral. Like a sandcastle waiting for the tide to come in. As you walk, you notice a group of children playing in a courtyard. They're chasing each other and laughing, their faces bright and carefree. It's a simple scene, but it reminds you of the enduring power of life, even in the face of uncertainty. Maybe the oracle is wrong. Maybe everything will be fine. Or maybe not. Maybe you should start stocking up on figs. You decide to visit the pottery workshops you heard were located at the edge of the palace complex. Some people say they have strange ritual significance. The production of pottery was often linked to religious practices and beliefs, with certain shapes and designs being associated with specific deities or rituals. So obviously, you think you might find a clue to what that whole upheaval thing was about. You finally find the workshops. The kilns are huge, and the air is thick with the smell of clay and smoke. Potters, their hands covered in mud, are busy shaping and firing vessels of all shapes and sizes. You watch them for a while, mesmerized by their skill and dedication. It's a craft that has been passed down through generations, a testament to the enduring human desire to create and to leave a mark on the world. You ponder the wheel, and if it was really invented to make the production of pottery easier, or if someone was just bored one afternoon. As you turn to leave, you spot a small, unassuming clay tablet lying on a workbench. It's covered in strange symbols, unlike anything you've ever seen before. Could this be a clue? A message from the gods? Or just a doodle by a bored potter? You pick it up, brushing off the dust. The symbols seem to shimmer in the light, as if they hold some hidden power. You clutch the tablet tightly, feeling a sudden surge of determination. You don't know what the future holds, but you're ready to face it. You've got a rash, a cryptic warning, and a mysterious clay tablet. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, friend, let's get you ready for bed. Think of it like a mental spa day, only instead of cucumbers, we're slathering on ancient Greece. You trudge along a dusty path, the Aegean sun finally dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and bruised purple. Your sandals, cobbled together by some probably not unionized artisan, slap a rhythmic beat against the worn stones. It's been a long day navigating the Agora, haggling for olives, and trying to avoid Sophocles, who corners you every time he sees you to rant about his latest tragedy. Honestly, the man needs an editor, and maybe some decaf. You're heading back to your humble abode, a one-room affair that makes a modern studio apartment look palatial. Don't worry though, it's all part of the experience. Think of it as immersive historical tourism, with slightly more dust and questionable plumbing. The air, still warm from the day's heat, carries the scent of thyme and wild oregano, a surprisingly calming aroma even if you're pretty sure a goat grazed on it earlier. You reach your dwelling, let's call it your Athenian Airbnb, and fumble with the rudimentary wooden latch. Inside, it's dim, illuminated only by the faint glow of a small oil lamp. No Netflix and chill tonight, my friend. Instead, it's all about rustic charm. Speaking of charm, you might be sharing your room with a few uninvited guests. Bugs, mostly. Maybe a mouse if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on your perspective. It's all part of the authentic experience. Just remember, ancient Greeks were nothing if not pragmatic. They probably had names for all the critters, like Steve the Spider or Brenda the Beetle, or something equally Greek. One historical fact for you. In ancient Greece, houses were generally small and simple, often made of mud, brick, or stone. privacy wasn't exactly a high priority, and families often shared living spaces with animals. Historians still argue whether this was due to necessity or a philosophical commitment to communal living. I'm going with necessity. I value my personal space way too much for philosophical commitment. Now, time to shed those sandals. Ah, the relief. Your feet are probably screaming louder than one of Euripides' heroines. And let's be real, that's saying something. You change into your chiton, a simple tunic that's basically the ancient Greek equivalent of pajamas. Surprisingly comfortable, actually. Unless you get it caught on a chariot wheel. Before bed, you might partake in a simple meal. Olives, cheese, some bread. Maybe a fig if you're feeling fancy. No late-night pizza runs in ancient Athens, unless you somehow convince a chariot driver to deliver it. Which, I'm just going to say, good luck with that. The quirky tidbit for tonight. Ancient Greeks believed that dreams were messages from the gods. So if you dream about being chased by a minotaur, well, that's probably just Zeus having a laugh at your expense. Although, frankly, I'd take the minotaur over another of Sophocles' lectures. You lie down on your sleeping mat, which is basically a glorified pile of straw. Hey, at least it's organic. The oil lamp flickers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The silence is broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant braying of a donkey. It's surprisingly peaceful. Fun fact number 2, the ancient Greeks were big fans of sleep. They even had a god of sleep, Hypnos, and a god of dreams, Morpheus. They took their naps seriously, these guys. I approve. Now, as you drift off, let your imagination wander. Imagine yourself strolling through the olive groves, listening to the philosophers debate in the Agora, or watching the athletes compete in the Olympic Games. Just try not to picture that minotaur. Unless you're into that sort of thing. No judgment here. And speaking of the Olympics, you know what's a fringe idea? Some scholars believe that athletes competed naked not because of some high-minded aesthetic ideal, but because it was a form of social leveling. Everyone, regardless of wealth or status, was equally exposed. That's one way to ensure fair play, I suppose. The final historical fact before you doze: ancient Greek society was deeply religious. They believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses who controlled every aspect of their lives. From the weather to their harvests, everything was attributed to divine intervention. Try blaming Zeus the next time you oversleep. See how that goes down. But before you slip into the embrace of Morpheus himself, there's one more thing. It is joke time. What do you call a Greek who can't swim? Synkratos. I know, terrible. But hey, at least it's historically relevant, right? Or, here's another one. Why did the Greek philosopher refuse to play hide and seek? Because he couldn't be found. I'll see myself out. Okay, last one, I promise. What's a Greek mathematician's favorite dessert? Pie. Okay, I am done. Now, just settle into the stillness. Feel the gentle air on your skin. Hear the soft sounds of the night. Let your thoughts drift away like clouds in the sky. The scent of time lingers, a comforting presence. The shadows dance and sway, creating patterns on the walls. The world outside fades away, replaced by the landscape of your own imagination. The warmth of the day slowly dissipates, leaving a cool, calming sensation. Your muscles relax, releasing the tension of the day. Your breathing becomes slow and deep. You are safe. You are peaceful. You are ready to rest. Let the worries of the day drift away, like leaves on a gentle stream. Let the sounds of the night lull you into a state of tranquility. Let the darkness embrace you, a soft, comforting blanket. Feel yourself sinking deeper and deeper into relaxation. Your mind is quiet. Your body is still. You are at peace. Imagine yourself floating on a calm, still sea. The water is warm and gentle, caressing your skin. The sky is clear and blue, filled with twinkling stars. You are surrounded by beauty and tranquility. You are at peace. You are loved. Just breathe, slowly, deeply, easily. You are safe. You are calm. You are loved. Sweet dreams.